Fear? No, it wasn't fear. Fear is teeth biting at your throat. It's the edge of a razor over your eye. Seeing those things move, it was something else. It was beyond fear. Beyond what I can reasonably put into words. But I will try, for all the good it can do us now. I'm old enough to remember when we first found evidence of alien life. Civilization outside Zif, the only world we had ever known. It had only been less than a decade after we achieved faster than light travel through the manipulation of gravitic fields, and we had already stumbled upon our first stellar neighbors. The deep void telescopes we sent into the black detected them through their decayed radio transmissions and the signs of industrial production. It was just the ruins of a long-gone species of quadrupedal reptiles that had managed to carve out an interstellar kingdom spanning a handful of star systems in the void. Yet, it was enough to send us into a frenzy. Celebrations across the entire Ziphian race. Riots, excitement, fear, hope. It didn't matter that our first contact with another sentient life was merely with their remains. We knew we weren't the only life forms to rise into the cosmos. Our technology improved. Each grav jump became more efficient, took us further and further into the black. More expeditions followed. Long-range telescopes, drones, scientific armada after scientific armada, all were sent into the void, searching, looking for others. Eventually we found them. More civilizations like the first one. Different species of sentient xenos. Each with their distinct biology, culture, technology, and each one of them dead. We scoured the stars for intelligent life, and all we found were their star-bleached skeletons. Perhaps we had taken too long to evolve, too long to technologically progress, too long to reach for the stars above, until the rest of the galaxy had already burned itself out, leaving for us only ruins. Still, we hoped. If not for finding actual life among the stars, then for answers. We felt that the universe owed us that much. That's why I joined the expeditions. That's why I visited dead world after dead world, dead city after dead city. That's why I shifted through the bones of countless civilizations, only to find their hollowed eye sockets looking back at me. When we broke through the atmo of Dresdel II, on the Burlabos and the Tetrioxin, I had no reason to believe it would be any different. Our deep void telescopes had detected the signs of civilization on the second planet of the Dresdel system for some time. Decayed radio waves and the faint remnants of electromagnetic transmissions. Gases in the atmosphere that hinted at industrial production, possibly artificial structures scattered across the planet's surface. Nothing out of the ordinary. It wasn't until we had reached orbit that we detected the anomalies. Several kilometer-tall structures near the largest urban center of the planet. Structures that had gone completely unnoticed by the deep void telescopes. Even the imaging equipment of our voidcraft couldn't obtain clear pictures of them. Only their blurred outlines and radiation artifacts appeared on the picture, as if the entire area those structures were located at was contaminated with nuclear fallout. Look at them. They're clearly artificial, and you can see limbs, a head. I think they're statues. Kralolatkin, the leader of the expedition, said, pointing to the distorted images of the anomalies. I could see it too. They indeed looked like statues, but apart from their laughably colossal and impractical scale, I couldn't find any scientific value in examining them. Don't they look familiar to you? Kralolatkin said back. Bipedal, 2 arms, 1 head. I could tell what he was hinting at. We called them Det Abadrak, doom heralds. They were one constant between every dead civilization we had come across. Records of them starting to appear on a planet in the last few years. or sometimes even the last months, before signs of intelligent life on it would cease. Sometimes it was snippets of corrupted video in ancient digital storage. Sometimes it was pictures of them on half-destroyed analog film. On Fa'agehan, a world belonging to a civilization that had been driven more by art rather than anything else, they were depicted in paint. Strangely enough, I always thought that among all the videos and pictures, and even holograms, it was in these paintings that the true nature of the Doom Heralds could be gleaned more vividly. Eldritch creatures clad in black, descending from the heavens in machines beyond the comprehensions of the artist. Painted in an almost abstract way, it was the best they could do to capture the nature of what they were witnessing. As my second in command, I want you to take a team and survey the city on Berlabos. I will take my team on the Tetriaxon and do a preliminary scan of these statues. Krilla Atkin spoke. We will be in direct contact with each other, but in case whatever caused the distortions in the imaging of the statue site messes with our communications, I want you to follow protocol and leave the planet after 5 standard days. It was dawn when we broke through the planet's atmosphere over the ruins of the urban sprawl we had initially detected, and the ruined cityscape seemed to be on fire as it was bathed in the rising sun's rays. I could go on to describe it in its form, its unique architecture, the character of its buildings that revealed the intricacies of the civilization that had built them. I could describe their monuments, their places of worship, the decorations that dotted their streets. But truth is, one dead city is much like any other dead city. Habitation blocks that are crumbling to dust as time washes over them, streets swallowed by the nature that reclaims them, technology that once represented the pinnacle of the people that had invented it, now in abject disrepair. Another tomb in the void, Kralla Atkin remarked, as his shuttle continued into the horizon towards the statues, and mine began its final approach to the landing site, in what looked like the crumbling city's main square. There's this inescapable sense of finality that almost overwhelms you when you walk through the ruins of a city like this. The feeling of being swallowed in canyons formed by the mega buildings that claw into the sky with talons of broken glass and crumbling concrete. The gaze of a billion ghosts watching on as you trespass through what once was their home. I was familiar with that feeling. We had made my peace with the encroaching entropy that hang over the ruins of civilizations, and yet I knew from the moment I stepped out of the Berlabos that there was something different about this one. The air felt heavy and still, even through my exosuit's filtering systems, as if whatever calamity had befallen this world was still close by. Sure enough, our environmental scans revealed traces of radiation around us, pockets of irradiated air and soil betraying the usage of weapons. For a moment, I felt joy before I realized the implications of what our scanners had just told us. For a moment, all I cared about was the breakthrough this expedition had achieved. Evidence of conflict, war. A clue as to the fate that had befallen this city, and maybe this entire world. All other ruins we had explored were older by millennia, and any traces of warfare that might have existed within them were long dissipated. Here, however, it reeked of war. Death itself could be seen with the naked eye. The shadows of the city's inhabitants were imprinted on the cracked streets and walls, immortalizing their final moments, where they stood when searing plasma and nuclear fire enveloped them. My team spent the entire first day of the expedition analyzing these shadows, trying to determine the direction of the impact, its yield, what weaponry could possibly be used to create it. By the end of the day, we had managed to only answer one of those questions. The direction of the blasts had come from was the same as where those statues were. That evening, we received the first message from the team of the Tetriaxon. The site was indeed saturated in radiation, and the heavy interference necessitated that the message was relayed from the statue site to the void craft in orbit, and then back down to our site in the ruins. So there was a 2-minute delay, had set up a camp about 3 kilometers away from the statues themselves, as any closer would put his team at risk of radiation poisoning. They would be making an attempt at approaching them further on the following morning, using their extremo suits that were designed to withstand much harsher conditions than the regular exosuits they would normally be using. After the audio message had arrived, a picture attachment followed. It was still blurred and marked the same radiation artifacts as the pictures that had been taken from orbit, but it showed the statues in much greater detail. They covered the horizon from end to end. Most were half buried in accumulated layers of dirt that had begun to form a mountain range over them, leaving only parts of the statues exposed. Enormous arms stretched forward towards the ruins, their digits ravenously reaching for what once was a city. Metallic faces the size of buildings, with 2 eyes and a gaping maw for a mouth. While the scientifically inclined part of me was happy to have received images of these statues, another part wished I had never seen them. Even from a picture taken at a distance from 3 kilometers away, merely the scale of those things was terrifying. It was their faces that really disturbed me, though. Somehow I felt like I had seen them before, in previous dead worlds. In the void black forms of those creatures, countless extinct civilizations had recorded, as if I had always known that this was what was hiding behind the black armor of the Doom Heralds. I didn't sleep easy that night, and upon waking up I discovered that neither did any of my members of my team. We had all been plagued by the same dream of being swallowed whole into those gaping maws. Sleep-deprived as we were, we pushed further into the ruins. Images from orbit had indicated that near the center of what once was a city, there was a sort of military command center, with antennas and scanning equipment still standing defiantly, as if their task had yet to be completed. On our way there, we encountered more of the shadows of the dead, except this time, I wasn't trying to ascertain data from them. I could really look at them instead, and I could see a pattern. The shadow figures were on their knees, facing towards the direction the blast was coming from, towards the statues. In those that were formed against walls, their arms were also clasped in what seemed to be a prayer. The realization wasn't an easy one to make, but it was clear. Whatever it was that had evaporated them, they were worshiping it in their final moments. The buildings we were headed to was indeed of military purpose, surrounded by carcasses of armored vehicles and the shadows of armed personnel also kneeling in prayer. The heavy armored door that guarded its entrance was still standing tall, unlike the surrounding walls that had mostly collapsed, with massive holes allowing us to enter. In and down we went, following the building to its several sublevels that we hoped would house data from the attack against the city. It seemed that those that managed to hide behind the protection of the command center's walls had survived the initial attack, albeit their fates weren't much better. It didn't take a ballistics analyst to determine that the survivors had turned on each other. Skeletons with bits of flesh and uniform cloth still clinging to them were collapsed facing each other, their ostial hands gripping rusted guns. Some other skeletons bore the scorch marks of energy weapons directly against their skulls, be it panic, despair, or the result of religious fervor in their final moments. Something had driven them to kill each other and themselves. The further down we went, the more brutal the scene became, with skeletons bearing marks of dismemberment and long dried blood staining the walls. Eventually, we found what was the monitoring room. Finding a way to activate the ancient tech proved easier than we thought. Unlike in the cases of other ruins I had searched for data, where only partial recordings could be cobbled together from destroyed digital storage units, the terminals here were well enough preserved to be functional. After readjusting the original input methods and bypassing their data pathing system to gain access to every available record in the database, we, for the first time, could have a clear image from the end of a civilization. We stood silent as we witnessed satellite recordings of voidcraft of impossible proportion and architecture tear into the fabric of reality in high orbit over the planet. As they opened fire against the doomed world's defensive fleet with weapons that ripped apart the very molecules that held them together, we heard the screams of the crews of those vessels echo across the halls, mixed with the screeching of torn metal. We heard the sounds their bodies made as they were rendered down to their atoms by the gravity-based weapons of the invaders. The entirety of the recordings last less than 15 standard minutes. A single remaining satellite feed briefly recorded footage of several hundred objects being ejected from the invading vessels and heading towards the planet's surface. When it came time to turn in for the night, none of us accepted to sleep within the command center, opting instead to set up camp in the ruins above, even with our radiation counters softly beeping in the background. We knew we would get a better sleep out in the open, instead of down there, accompanied by the corpses of the command center's original inhabitants and the screams of the defensive fleet. As the night before, we again received a message from the Tetriaxon's team. This time, far less clear and more heavily distorted. They had ventured to the statues. The message described the trek to the statue site proper, and how several members of the team had begun to get sick, even with their extremosuits on, vomiting inside them and developing skin rashes and itches that they couldn't get rid of. On one hand, I wanted to scream at the Kral'atkan to turn back and put the priority on his and his team's lives. On the other, I was mesmerized by the prospect of seeing those statues more closely. In fact, it was all I could think of once I had reached the surface after exploring the depths of the command center. I realized that I wanted to know more about them than anything else. Perhaps a part of me already knew what they were, what Kral'atkan would find once he and his team would reach them. Thankfully, Kral'atkan shared my obsession, as the next thing we received was a video. It was a jumbled mess, but it showed him and his team walking next to one of the statues, their flashlights lighting only a portion of the immense structure and disappearing into the night every time they pointed them upwards to the statue's head. Watching the team try to navigate their way around the statue's leg that stuck out, exposed from the mountain that had formed around it, looked like they were trying to navigate their way around a small town. Eventually, they managed to find an opening, a gap in the infrastructure created by the centuries of exposure to the elements. They crawled through the wound in the statue, with the last piece of the footage that was transmitted, revealing the enormous space inside of it. The following morning, I woke up possessed by the idea of laying my own eyes on the statues. I knew I couldn't make my way to them, naturally. Not only relocating my team be a lengthy process we couldn't afford, but I also didn't want to put their lives in danger. So taking a portable comms array on my back, I set off to start climbing up the most structurally sound building I could find in my vicinity. Once I found one that looked like it could make the day without collapsing, I instructed my team to continue digging through the data from the command center and to share anything they discovered with our voidcraft in orbit. Climbing up the dilapidated mega building took me the better part of the day. Along my ascent, I found drawings made of ash on the windows that weren't blasted away. The connection was immediately made in my mind. They were disturbingly similar, if not completely the same, to the drawings we had recovered from the Fa'agehan. Same abstract shapes used to depict an invading force descending from the heavens above. It seemed like this was the only way a mind, any mind of any sentient species, could comprehend these doom heralds. Next to one of them, lettering was barely visible. I fed the image of the letters in my universal translator and hoped that the data we had recovered from the command center would be enough to teach my translator a new language. Naturally, I had no way of knowing if the translation that was provided was accurate, but I still remember the word the translator gave me. Terra. On top of the building, I found the view I was looking for. the statues looking back at me in the distance. I also found charred and impaled corpses surrounding me, flash cooked by the immense heat of the blasts. They were preserved for eons in their last act of sacrifice to the otherworldly force that had come to pass judgment upon them. Alas, even with those sacrifices, the Doom Heralds, the Terrans, had found this planet to be wanting. On the rooftops of the other buildings was more of the same, a forest of impaled, in the name of unyielding and uncaring cruel gods. I stayed on that rooftop till night came, then day, then night again, then day again, even as storm clouds gathered above, and a bitter toxic rain started to fall. Occasionally I would direct my team below from the comms array, but mostly I would stand in awe of the distant statues, transfixed to their visage. On my second night there, I felt the building tremble beneath me, if it were not for the messages from my team, suggesting they had experienced the same. I would have thought it was the building's foundations finally starting to fail. On the next morning, a far more terrifying reality was revealed. I set my sight on the statues once more, except now there was something different about them. Somehow one of them seemed bigger. It took me far longer than I cared to admit to come to terms with what I was seeing. One of the statues was moving. I could see it making its way through the clouds, a metallic giant, shaking the ground in its every step. Without the blurring of radiation interference, I could finally see one clearly. Impossibly high and wide, as entire city blocks, adorned in fabulous and terrible patterns, the purpose of which I couldn't even begin to guess. I froze in place, unable to move. Not in fear, no. I was struck with awe at what kind of creature could create this machine god of war. Any impossibly loud war horn emanating from the moving mountains in the distance shook the building I was in and woke me from my trance. The run down the stairs was a frantic blur of me yelling instructions in the comms to prepare the Burlabos for immediate departure. A second blast of the war horn shattered every remaining window in the mega building, showering me with shards of glass, but I didn't even register I was hurt until I saw the blood flowing in little red rivers down my arms. Even then my body refused to acknowledge any pain. Once I was on the ground and trying to coordinate with the rest of my team, I realized I was also functionally deaf from the second blast of that horn. Some members of the team, junior researchers that had moved further ahead to check the source of the first blast, were being carried on makeshift stretchers, their bones broken from the shockwave. A sense of sound momentarily returned to me as I heard the retro thrusters of the Burlabos reaching towards us. We clang onto anything that seemed even remotely sturdy enough as the Burlabos flew into the storm clouds and away from the city, its doors still hanging open. I heard the horn for a third time, and that was when I saw the light, brighter and more brilliant than the light of any star, so intense I could see through the flesh of the Ziphian standing in front of me, as if it wasn't even there. Those standing nearest to the doors had any exposed flesh charred right on their bones. The fire that engulfed the city ruins beneath, it resembled what the city looked like bathed in the dawning sun's rays. It was in those moments I could finally realize what had prompted the worship in the city, the suicides, the murders, and the sacrifices. To see such a thing, what even is our purpose here, if things like that can exist? If things like that can be created by another? As the shuttle's doors sealed and we reached orbit, I received one final message from Kral'atkin. It was a short text, followed by a data file. Hunters in the void. We can't run. It's too late to hide. The data file marked the star systems of the dead civilizations we had been seeking for so long, next to what looked like radio waves, electromagnetic and gravitational readings. All of those readings displayed the same abnormalities we ourselves had used to find those dead civilizations in the first place. One more star system was on that list in addition to the others. Our own. These doom heralds, these Terrans, they realized something we should have realized ourselves when we saw the corpse of that first civilization we ever encountered. They were predators in the night sky, and everyone who isn't them is their prey.